This is great. Yeah, most iconic characters that I played through the years. Wow, there's been so many. Um, well, the first you got on the list here is the Professor on the Bannerman's Island Monster, and that was a horror movie we made back in the '90s, and it was based on a local legend down Bannerman's Island on the Hudson River. People would be told not to swim down there because it was dangerous because there was a monster. And we joked around about that for years. And finally, some friends of ours got together and they said, we're going to make a movie. We want you to be in it. And I was like, wow, that's great. It's a sort of independent film. And they told me the story and how there was going to be a professor character and he was going to figure out how the monster had been a radioactive mutant from Indian Point nuclear power plant down in Peekskill, Buchanan, New York. And it had swam up the river near West Point and got involved with, not to give too much of the story away, killing a West Point cadet that was swimming in the Hudson River, and it was had tentacles and it lived in a shell. And I remember at the pitch meeting, I was just like, wait, what? No, that's crazy. And they said, no, the professor is, he's tasked, he's on sabbatical, but he's pulled in, he's tasked with trying to investigate this. And he starts to figure out that it not only is the story true, but there's a government conspiracy cover-up thing, of course. And the house pets are being lured by the tentacles, and then it grabs them and eats them, and then regurgitates the fur and the bones. And he's an expert in this sort of cryptozoology thing. And I had to learn up on a lot of it. I didn't know what any of that stuff was, so it was pretty crazy. It was great acting. I was told. When I look back now and I just cringe. It's not my best work. Next one, Kings of Route 2. This was a period piece in the 1950s based on a true story. This was up in Massachusetts, on Route 2 in Massachusetts. Hot rod car club guys would hang out on the weekends, Friday and Saturday nights, and there was a long stretch of straight road. They would drag race each other, and the guys who won week after week started to call themselves the Kings of Route 2, and they got quite a reputation. And this was something that came up. Again, people I knew through Emerson College were making movies later on in their career, and they said, I was working at a car museum at the time, and they came in to consult with me and the curator, and also we had a lecture, which was somebody who wrote a book about New England hot rodding back in the 40s and 50s, and there was a character, and he had been in World War II, and he was used to adventure, and he was adrenaline junkie, and he wanted cars to go fast, and a lot of that activity back then was out in California, as you can imagine, in salt flats racing and out in the desert and things, various things going on out in California. But there was a New England component to the hot rodding in the late 40s, early 50s, and so we sort of adapted bits and pieces that were true, and so it was based on the truth. But my character in there was Benny Sachs, and Benny, again, veteran speed junkie, a lot of fun, and I did a lot of research. I talked to some of the guys that were like that and that had grown up in that area and did that night sort of street racing, illegal street racing, and being rousted by the cops, and having your name on a list, and not quite a wanted poster in town, but close enough. The next one, Winter Hill Diary. This came about. I knew people in Somerville, Mass, where Winter Hill is located, and that was part of the Winter Hill gang and the Irish mob and things with Whitey Bulger. And I had a community access TV show back then, and a lot of the people involved in community access, it was a stepping stone. You could tell they wanted mostly to get a reel together and use that as a video resume, and then get to public television, Channel 2 in Boston, and do serious work. And so, there was a producers group, and after a while, I had a live call-in show that was an automotive program, off and on, and I was approached, and basically there was a character in this piece called Winter Hill Diary, and it had been a stage play originally, and it didn't do well. in Cambridge, Mass. And so there was a character, JP, who's Jean Paul. And he was originally from Canada, French Canadian character, and he was a limousine driver. And he got caught up in the gangster life, drugs, and he played second fiddle to this other character, and but in a weird way, he sort of took him under his wing, and they learned from each other, and they humanized each other in ways that they didn't realize until the bitter end. Anyway, and so I had to learn an accent and speak in a sort of French Canadian accent, which was interesting, and the whole shoot was basically 2 weeks off and on, and a lot of it was just around Boston with handheld equipment and very guerrilla sort of, again, independent movies, and that was a great experience playing JP in Winter Hill Diary. I wish they would make either a remake with a big budget, or it's kind of like The Departed or Black Mass, so maybe they've already done it, I guess. Another iconic character was a guy. It's called The Guy. There was when I read this was called Project Operation Codename, which was actually a parody of a sort of spy thriller genre piece. And again, this was in New York, not in Boston. And people who I knew through the entertainment network, I got on a list of people that were consulted for something, and they said there's a character, and I read. They gave me the script to read, and I read it, and it was a guy who's again, conspiracy theory stuff. He's being followed by a drone at one point, and this was when drones were new, and I just it was like looking into the future with this piece, and a lot of the things about the conspiracy stuff and what is our reality, and it had a Philip K. Dick sort of attribute to it, feel, aesthetic, sensibility, and so the more I read, I kept on it, and I kept, have you cast this yet? Have you cast the part? No, we can't find the right person, off and on, and so I was like, I bet I could do it, and I did it cheap, and so that was why I got in there, and I kept wanting the character to have a name, and it was, we went through different names, Benjamin and Vincent, and they just said it's the guy. He doesn't need to have a name, and it's better that he doesn't have a name. He's the man with no name, if you know from the Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns. Anyway. Next one is Leo Stern. He's in a movie that we did. This was pretty big budget, multi-million-dollar movie, The Recycler, and this is thinly based on a character sort of like Elon Musk, in the sense that he's the left-wing version of this industrialist magnate. Inherited money, but also parlayed that into big investments, hedge fund type background, and so he starts off with a silver spoon in his mouth, and part of the backstory, you don't like the guy, private school, Harvard, affluenza, privilege, things like that, and so you love to hate these characters, of course, but he has a heart of gold, and what happens is he invents this recycling technology. And he makes a lot of money doing that, and then he decides to use that for his own purposes. And so what he's doing is, as the recycling materials coming in these buildings that he owns all around the country, he's 3D printing a fleet of drones, attack drones, that are going to go around and destroy what he perceives to be his enemies. And again, it was very timely the way this came out. And I know it opened and closed basically in a week. I wish it had bigger box office. That would have been great, of course, for my career, but also for the story. I think a lot of people, it's online. You can see scenes of it online, but it's not the same. And that was Leo Stern in The Recycler. So take a look for that. The next character was the Barney Oldfield story. I played Barney Oldfield, and this was, again, a period piece. Barney Oldfield was a early racer, 1910s to 1920s, the heroic era, as they called it. And Barney Oldfield was a real character. He had grown up in the Midwest, and I did a lot of research into this character in this part, and he was a bicycle racer. Before automobile racing, a lot of people couldn't afford horses. You could afford a bicycle, and so he was a tinker and sort of ersatz homebrew engineer, and he was problematic, I think, is what they would say nowadays. He was racist. misogynist, a womanizer, not a good guy. Smoked. He always had a cigar and a stub in his mouth, and so he had this sort of minimal helmet and sort of the goggles and what you would expect World War One flyer type outfit there, and really interesting character. Um, Not a good guy again, and so playing a bad guy, with some redeemable qualities, I suppose. But he was basically the character in Great White Hope. The Jack Johnson would beat up this guy, and then Jack Johnson in real life raced Barney Oldfield, and Barney wanted to put black people in their place, and so it was a bittersweet sort of thing, and check that out, the Barney Oldfield story. Next iconic character, wow, Clem, the Onionville incident. Now this Onionville is a takeoff on Uniontown, which is in northeast Dutchess County, New York, and there was a farm. They plowed under the farm, the onion farm, and in the summer you could still smell the onions, and it was a kind of dog patch kind of place. Wrong side of the tracks, one way street, dead end. And so some weird stuff goes on there. It's kind of like Blair Witch, I guess you would. Some people that reviewed it online said it was a derivative of Blair Witch Project, which I understand completely. It had that cinema verite feel to it. And again, a lot of handheld, shaky stuff, and not a real good, solid ending. People like the good guys to win or something like that, and this was definitely not that kind of movie. Clem sort of blunders into this thing, and again takes a wrong turn, and gets embroiled in this sort of subculture, and he finds out his car won't start when he tries to leave, and so it sort of goes from there. There's a lot of movies like this, as you know. It's formulaic, and but again, I was doing somebody a favor, and hopefully you would get, you do a role like that, and hopefully you get better work out of it. People see you somewhere else, and you get to go to Hollywood and work for them. Next character was Mr. Crozier. He was in Rocks on Posts, which was at Sundance, and made some waves, and people were interested in that. And that's a parapolitical, I wouldn't say conspiracy, well, sort of a thriller, but it was called, the writer and the director and the producer called it an experiment in phenomenology, which I thought was really interesting. I know about phenomenology, and so I was immediately interested in that. And I wasn't the first pick. And they passed on me. I auditioned twice, three times, over video, and then in person, and then back and forth, and we couldn't work it out. And then they got somebody else, and that didn't work out. Bad for them, lucky for me. But Rocks on Posts was a thing where, Mr. Crozier's driving around, and he notices that the people are putting rocks on fence posts, and he doesn't understand what that is. He thinks it's something, and then somebody else notices it, and they start to put the pieces together. And there's some other characters. I worked with some great actors in that project, and a great cinematographer. And what happened was they started to put the pieces together and solve this mystery or riddle, or expose the phenomenology aspect of it, and that was a great part to play. Last one is Vernon Carter in The Sculptor, and this really made my career. Vernon Carter is based on an actual, not quite Henry Moore, not quite, these famous sculptors in art, in postmodernism and things like that. The sort of sculptures that you would see, and maybe it looks like a bird, maybe it looks like a anthropomorphic duck or something. It's hard to tell. So a lot of this, again, you do the research into these people and what they're about, and a lot of them are overeducated, I guess you would say, and have they aspire to greatness, and sometimes a lot of these people don't have greatness in their lifetime, and this character had that situation where they were diabolical, evil genius, art news subscriber, and ended up making sculptures, but also building them because this is another veteran, somebody who knew about explosives and things, and so they built explosives and bombs into the sculptures. And so this character knew they were going to die. They had inoperable cancer and decided to leave the world, I guess, worse. How would you phrase that? Worse. Worse off by the sculptures they made. That they didn't, people didn't know they were bombs when they bought them, but they were in office building lobbies. They were in museums. They were in private collections. And so it's not quite time bombs, or I forget. They allude. I remember reading the first couple drafts of the script and just being sort of confused about how were they, did they have a timer mechanism, or how did they know when something was going to degrade inside this to make the fuse go off, but they never really got around to explaining that, which I think is great. Sometimes writers, they'll write something and then it goes through many different versions of the script, and you get to a point where you don't need to over explain this, and it's better just to let the audience figure it out on their own and fill in the blanks on their own. So between the writer and the director, and sometimes there is input, they'll want to improv some scenes, or some, you did the research into these people. What would they do when they're in their studio? They're making an art piece, a sculpture, an artistic statement, and then there's this other hidden aspect to it underneath the surface, as it were. So that's it. Thank you.